72-year-old woman and 20-year-old man. Urgent. Hot bread, cards on the table, secret room in Willow Creek, Vermont. Gossip is the main export. And the topic this winter was Evelyn Croft, the widowed owner of Hearthstone Bakery. Evelyn, a stern and lonely woman, was going bankrupt. The bakery, once the heart of the town, was now silent. Until Adam arrived. He showed up one snowy night, a young man in his early 20s, quiet, intense, and handsome in a way that unnerved the town. Evelyn hired him on the spot. But what shocked the town was that she also gave him the old vacant room above the bakery. The judgment was instantaneous and cruel. The city didn't see an employee, it saw a scandal. Locals pass by and look over. They see Evelyn, looking tired, and Adam standing behind her, placing his hands on her shoulders in a gesture of comfort. The light from inside casts a silhouette that seems intimate. "It's disgusting," the grocer muttered. "He's not even 30. She's 70. What's he doing with her up there every night?" The hint of sensuality wasn't real, but the town fabricated it. They saw the way he helped her close the register, his fingers brushing hers. They saw his care as seduction, her gratitude as senility. He was the opportunist, the call boy eyeing the bakery's deed. And because of that, Willow Creek turned its back. Business, already bad, died. The bakery was being boycotted, condemned by the town's sordid imagination. The conflict, which had been smoldering in cold whispers and sidelong glances throughout Willow Creek, was about to burst into literal flames. It happened in the darkest hour, shortly after midnight, as the snow fell in almost sacred silence over the sleepy main street. A faint orange glow, almost beautiful against the white flakes, began to flicker behind the dusty windows of the Hearthstone Bakery. Within minutes, the glow became a hunger. A short circuit in the old oven, wiring that hadn't been replaced since the 1960s, was enough. The bakery was on fire. The smell of burnt bread, quickly replaced by the acrid odor of old wood and burning insulation, was the alarm that woke the town. In less than 10 minutes, it seemed the entire population of Willow Creek was out in the streets, in their bathrobes and winter coats, watching in hypnotic horror as the flames licked the historic facade, the heart of the town being devoured. Evelyn Croft stood outside, barefoot in the dirty snow, her face a mask of utter terror. But she wasn't looking at the bakery, her legacy, her only source of income. She was looking at the second-story window, the room where Adam slept. She screamed his name, a high-pitched, hysterical sound that cut through the roar of the fire and the first sirens approaching. The grocer standing beside her husband murmured, "She's more worried about the boy than the building." The crowd watched, and their irrational panic, their complete disregard for property in favor of the young man, only confirmed in their minds the sordid nature of her obsession. They saw a senile woman who had lost all perspective. Suddenly, the front door burst open with a loud explosion, and Adam appeared, his face covered in soot, coughing violently, his chest heaving. The crowd backed away. The volunteer firefighters who had just arrived shouted at him to get out, to get away from the structure. There was a collective sigh of relief. But then, Adam did something that defied all logic. He looked at Evelyn, saw the terror in her eyes, and with a fearlessness that shocked everyone, he turned and ran back into the flames. Evelyn's scream was primal. The crowd was silent for a second, stunned. And then someone's voice, clear in the cold air, shouted what everyone was thinking. "He's going for the money! The bastard's going for the cash register!" The smoke was black and thick, a suffocating inferno. The heat was so intense it pushed the crowd across the street. The roof began to creak, the sound of ancient beams giving way under the onslaught. Firefighters struggled to control the flames, but it was too late to save the people inside. The entire world held its breath, staring at the dark door, now a portal to hell. Evelyn had collapsed, holding her head in her hands, rocking back and forth, murmuring his name repeatedly. And then, just when it seemed impossible anyone could survive inside, Adam emerged again. He wasn't running, he was staggering, nearly falling with every step. He wasn't carrying the metal cash register. He held, pressed to his chest like a shield, a heavy old wooden box, its edges charred but somehow almost intact. He took 3 more steps into the snow and collapsed to his knees, panting, depositing the box on the ground before the smoke finally overcame him. Adam fell to his knees in the dirty snow, a mixture of soot and ice that hissed at the touch of his heated skin. The cold air burned his lungs with each convulsive breath, and he coughed violently, the dry, painful sound echoing in the suddenly silent street. He pushed the charred wooden box away from him, as if it were his only accomplishment in the world, the sole purpose of his suicide mission, and then collapsed onto his hands, gasping for breath. The firefighters shouted for people to stay back, for him to stay still, but Evelyn Croft heard nothing. The stern woman, the reserved widow Willow Creek knew and feared, the woman who faced bankruptcy with a cold, impenetrable dignity, simply vanished. She ran. Her bare feet, pale against the soot of the sidewalk, sank into the snow, ignoring the biting ice and the warning shouts. She didn't run to the box. She didn't run to assess the damage to her property. She ran to him. She fell beside him, not with the rage the town expected from someone whose life had just turned to ash, but with a raw, relieved desperation that shattered decades of carefully constructed composure. The crowd watched, transfixed, waiting for the climax of the scandal. They waited for confirmation of their suspicions. The passionate, inappropriate kiss that would prove her obsession was real. But what they saw broke them. Evelyn clutched at him, pulling his soot-stained face to her chest, cradling his head against the thick fabric of her robe, rocking him back and forth. And what they heard wasn't a lover's whisper. It was a mother's sob. "My boy," she cried, her voice choked, tears streaming freely, washing clean trails in the soot on his face. "My boy, you're safe. You're alive. You're safe." The murmur of the crowd didn't just stop. It died. The silence that followed was louder than the roar of the fire and the crackle of the wood. Boy. The word echoed in the cold night. She had called him boy. The grocer looked at her husband, her mouth open, pure confusion replacing righteous indignation. The narrative they had woven so carefully over the past few months, the sordid tale of seduction, manipulation, and a young opportunist, suddenly made no sense. The intimacy they had seen as sensual now seemed undeniably maternal. But how? Adam, still panting, catching his breath, pulled back just enough to look at her. He didn't look like a lover caught red-handed. He looked like a soldier who had completed a near-impossible mission. With what little strength he had left, he pushed the heavy wooden box toward her, his fingers leaving soot marks on the ancient lid. "I couldn't let it burn," he gasped, his voice hoarse with smoke. "I couldn't." It was his. His? Evelyn stared at the box as if it were a relic, the shock of his words hitting her. The box her late husband, Elias, had kept locked in his office, the box she hadn't seen in years. With trembling hands, she opened the rusted brass latches. The crowd instinctively gathered closer, a circle of pale faces illuminated by the flames. They still expected to see wads of cash, proof of Adam's theft, the explanation for his heroic act. But inside, there was no money. There were no deeds. There were only old recipe books, their edges yellowed and water-stained, and a packet of letters tied with a faded velvet ribbon. Evelyn looked up. She saw the faces of her neighbors, the people who had boycotted her, who had called her senile, who had judged her character and Adam so cruelly. She saw the guilt beginning to creep into their eyes, the shame of her hasty conclusion now exposed by the smoke and flames. She looked at the fire, now consuming the remains of her bakery, and looked at the box in her lap. That fire had taken her livelihood, but Adam's heroic act had given her something far more important, the truth. And she knew, right there in the snow, surrounded by the wreckage of her life, that the time for secrets was over. Willow Creek would hear the story, the real story. With trembling hands, not from the cold, but from adrenaline and revelation, Evelyn unlocked the brass clasps of the old wooden box. The now silent crowd approached, a guilty circle of faces illuminated by the orange glow of the flames consuming the bakery. They had expected to see money. They saw only paper. "There are things this city," Evelyn began, her voice surprisingly strong, cutting through the roar of the fire and the guilty silence. "There are things you don't know." She pulled out the first packet of letters, tied with a faded velvet ribbon. The paper was yellowed, brittle, and smelled faintly of cedar and age. She recognized the handwriting immediately. It was from Elias, her late husband. A letter she had never seen, She began to read aloud, her voice carrying into the cold night. "My dear Evelyn," began the letter dated 20 years ago. "If you are reading this, it is either because I did not have the courage to tell you while I was alive, or because fate intervened. Do you remember that terrible fire in the building on Silva Street in Boston, when I went to close that contract?" The crowd murmured. Some of the older ones remembered the news. A devastating fire. Evelyn continued reading, her own voice breaking as she discovered her husband's secret. Elias described how he was there when the fire started. Amid the chaos, he helped a terrified young single mother named Mariana and her infant son escape from an upstairs apartment. He pulled them out seconds before the floor collapsed. The boy's father was not so lucky. Elias, devastated by the grief of never having children of his own, made a promise to this frightened and destitute mother. "I promised her, Evelyn," Elias wrote, "that we would care for them, that the boy would have a dignified future, far from the poverty the fire had imposed on him. He is the son we never had." A collective sob seemed to escape the crowd. The grocer's owner clapped her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with horror and comprehension. Elias's letter continued. He explained that he had secretly helped Mariana for years, paying for her housing and education, but he didn't just give her money. He gave her life. He gave her Hearthstone Bakery's most precious asset, a living portion of the original sourdough starter, the centuries-old mother culture Elias had inherited from his grandfather. He taught Mariana the art of baking so she could support herself. "The soul of our bakery is with her, Evelyn," he wrote, "so she can start over." The silence on the street was deafening. Every person present was reevaluating the past few months of cruel gossip. The young man they saw as a predator was Elias's protégé. Evelyn, tears now flowing freely, picked up the second letter. This one was more recent, the handwriting different. It was from Adam. "Miss Evelyn," she read, her voice trembling. "You don't know me, but my name is Adam. My mother Mariana passed away last month." He continued, explaining that before she died, his mother told him the whole story. She gave him Elias's letter and the last living portion of Hearthstone yeast, which she had cultivated like a sacred flame for 20 years. She taught him to bake with it, to respect it. "My mother made me promise," Evelyn read, "that I would come to Willow Creek, not to ask for anything, but to repay the debt of our lives. I came to honor Elias's memory and use the gift he gave me to help you rebuild the bakery." The revelation hit Willow Creek like a physical blow. The truth was as devastating as the fire that still burned. Adam was no opportunist. He was no lover. He was a son of promise, an honored heir, bringing home the soul of the bakery they thought he was trying to steal, the sensuality the city invented, the intimate touches they saw through the window, the hands brushing against the cash register. It was all a farce created by their own minds. It was filial piety. The callboy they despised was, in fact, the only true heir to Elias Croft's legacy. Evelyn's desperate embrace in the snow, her cry of "my boy," it all made sense. He wasn't her lover. He was her son, the son Elias had given her after all. The revelation struck Willow Creek like a thunderbolt. Adam was no opportunist. He was no lover. He was a son of promise, an heir of honor, returning the kindness Evelyn's father had sown. The sensuality the town invented was, in fact, filial piety. The fire, though devastating, exposed the truth. The community, consumed by shame, came together. They not only helped rebuild the bakery, they became its most loyal customers. Months later, Hearthstone Bakery is fully restored, gleaming and bustling with customers. The smell of fresh bread fills the street. The smell emanating from the bakery was no longer one of suspicion. It was the smell of redemption. Adam, using Elias's original yeast, was baking the best bread Willow Creek had tasted in a generation. The bakery, once a symbol of scandal, became the beating heart of the town. Evelyn and Adam, now openly family, tended the counter together. Their story became a local legend, a reminder that rash judgment is the bane of a small town, and the truth often lies hidden beneath the ashes. What would you do if you discovered you judged someone so unfairly? Leave your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like this story if you believe in the power of second chances.